Remember, when the last time you faced a challenging task which exceeded your skills and knowledge? My memorable challenge happened when I was asked by my boss to help with the preparation of the conference speech on creative economy. And at that time, I was absolutely not an expert in the topic, and I knew really a little bit about it. And it was not enough to help with the preparation. What did you do when you faced this challenging task? Did you refuse? What I did, when I came back to my office, I opened the internet and started to search for valuable resources like interesting books, articles, or interviews with experts. And in a week time, I knew enough to help with the preparation of the theoretical part of the speech. If you acted similar to me, and if you didn't refuse, then you know now on your own experience what is self-directed learning, because at that moment you were doing exactly that. According to the prevailing definition of self-directed learning offered by Malcolm Knowles, in its broadest meaning, self-directed learning describes a process in which individuals take the initiative, with or without the help of others, in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating learning outcomes. You, as an educator, can design your educational course with the help of self-directed learning approach. For example, your course is on the topic of ecology or in the field of ecology. So the thing that you need to do is to set up an overall learning goal for the whole group. And it will be very general, like learning ecological situation in a certain region. And after that, learners will work together with you to decide on the scope of the project, timeline, and the end result that would demonstrate their personal learning. So one person can choose to learn about the ecological situation in the whole Europe and create educational website about that. Another person can choose to research the deforestation effects in Italy and write a report to the government about that. And the third one can choose a certain city and create a video blog or a YouTube channel based on the interviews with local people. By allowing to choose personal learning objectives, strategies, and resources, you allow your students to rely on their interest and their strengths. And it is the essence of the self-directed learning. Self-directed learning is a staged process, and each stage has its own methods. The first stage is called monitoring stage, and it's a preparatory stage. Here you should check in general, are your learners capable of self-directed learning or not? Because this approach is suitable not for everyone. The older your learners are, the more they tend to instructional approach. And it is connected not only to cognitive aspects of the age, but mostly on economical and cultural. Perhaps you already heard about the generation theory, which was developed by Neil Howes and William Strauss. So according to the theory, all people are divided into certain generations according to years of birth. And each generation has their own needs in learning as well. So so-called traditionalists who were born from 1922 to 1946 and so-called baby boomer generation who were born from 1946 till 1964 will be not very happy if you use a lot of interactive methods or if you use self-directed learning approach. But those who are called millennials and who were born from 1981 till 1996 will be very happy about both interactivity and self-directed learning approach. To check your learners and their readiness, you can use self-directed learning readiness scale. It is a self-report questionnaire developed in 1977, which is still very popular. It is designed to measure the complex of attitudes, skills, and characteristics that show an individual's current level of readiness to manage their own learning process. The adult version of this questionnaire is translated into 19 languages, including German, Dutch, Spanish, French, Lithuanian, Latvian, Greek, Portuguese, Russian, Polish, and Turkish. In this questionnaire, respondents are asked to read a statement and then indicate the degree to which that statement accurately describes their own attitudes, their own beliefs, actions, and skills. And using this scale, you will be able to conclude if your students and your learners are generally able for self-directed learner, or better, maybe to use some other approach. And when you know that they're definitely ready and everything is okay, then you can go to the second step, and it will be assessing learning needs. So self-directed learning can be successful only in the case when your learners are really great motivated. And this motivation can happen only if the whole educational process relies on their acute learning needs. How to check learning needs? There are plenty of questionnaires available on this topic and available for this task. But also it is recommended not just to distribute a questionnaire for individual filling in, but to organize an open discussion in the group based on questions which you can find in those questionnaires. For example, the need analysis questionnaire, which is called WIN, Wants, Interests, and Needs, proposes first to ask questions about the wants that your learners have in certain educational areas, their interests and their needs. For instance, the general sphere is gardening, and then you ask your learners, what is your want in gardening? And somebody can write or answer you, I want to become the most famous gardener of my city. Then on the next stage, you have to ask them what level in the study area you need to acquire to fulfill those interests, wants, and needs. So what level you need to acquire to become the most famous gardeners in your city. So when you've finished with needs analysis, then you go to the setting goals. Goal setting helps to break the study into small, manageable chunks. And learners may have 1 or 2 overall goals or divide them into weekly goals, which usually increase motivation because it makes learning process and the progress more noticeable. So you can use any methods for goal setting, but better to use SMART criteria together with that. What is SMART criteria? When you already have a list of goals, help your students to smarten them up, to check, in other words, if these goals are attainable, if they are realistic, if there is any good deadline for reaching these goals, if they are very specific or not. Because if the goal is very general, it is really difficult to set up steps for how to reach this goal. Or if it's goal not measurable, or if the learner cannot understand how to measure the final result, it will be also very difficult to set up steps for reaching this goal. For instance, somebody can write a goal like, I would like to learn how to meditate on a very good level. Then you can ask your learner, by which criteria or which indicators you will measure that you already meditate on a good level. What is a good level for you? Or if it's a goal realistic or not realistic, this learner can say that he wants to learn to meditate on a very good level in 2 days. Is it a realistic deadline? So smart criteria really help much to check if goals are created and formulated and set up in a very efficient way. After you are ready with the goals, you go to the next step, which is choosing resources. And the methods of locating resources can really help on this stage. When adult learners are interested in a particular subject, it can be difficult for them to know where to start from. And when they progress in learning, new questions emerge and new resources are needed. So method of locating resources is a guide which is created by the educator and which helps learners to find necessary resources on every stage of learning. Types of resources can be very different. Massive open online courses like MOOCs, libraries, educational games, forums, even some closed or open groups which they can try to join for discussions. What is important, it is to structure these resources by the main source, and in each source you can locate resources according to the level of competence to make navigation easier for learners when they make a progress in learning. So they know that this particular group of resources are for beginners and this group of resources are for those who already are experienced in the topic. And don't forget about the large platforms providing free resources which do not require the permission to use. For example, the Open Education Resource Commons. It is a hive of literature, scholarly work, instructional materials, and open course from quite popular institutions. And this platform has a separate collection of learning materials for adult education. After you've finished with resources, you can start making a plan. This could take the form of a simple record of goal set, a more detailed plan in which weekly goals, materials, and study activities are laid out, or even a learning contract signed by the educator and the learner. One of the good examples of the method used on the stage is planning your time method. This method can be applied individually when you distribute the template for each learner and they fill it in individually, or you can help them by making the group discussion or making individual meetings and play a role of the educational coach. So when you ask them about the time available, realistically available for education, and help them to create additional questions, additional to those which are provided by the template, to track their progress during their educational process, learning process. There are many other methods available. One of them is the learning contract. It is based on a simple 4-step process that includes creating learning objectives, determining learning resources and strategies, evidence of accomplishment, and criteria for evaluating the evidence. Or another method, which is called self-directed learning project proposal and contract. It is like a document which is divided into 4 sections according to 4 simple questions. The first one, what do I want to learn? The second one, how to know and show what I learned. The third one, how will I learn it? And the fourth one, how will I monitor my own progress? Another example is personal development plan. It is similar to the others, but includes both target completion days and actual completion days, and a space to articulate what the learner needs from the educator and from the group. Templates for all these methods are created under the Creative Commons license, which means that you can freely download them, use them in a regional format, or change it according to your educational needs. So now we approached to the second stage of the self-directed learning, implementation of the plan individually or in collaboration. And here is the question. What is the role of an educator in a self-directed learning? And if learners are self-directed, then why do we need an educator in general? The goal of learners is to become independent, yes. But self-directed learning is not about solitary learning. It can be highly interdependent, collaborative, and cooperative. And ironically, collaboration is a very important part of self-directed learning. And as you remember from previous lectures, collaboration is critically important for adult students because it helps neuron pathways to emerge in a brain, and it helps learning process actually to happen. So on this stage, the educator provides guidance for critical thinking, for brainstorming, and various types of creative thinking. And the main role of educator is to be a facilitator. I advise you to learn 2 methods, Scrumper and false faces method, which both are described by Michael Michalko. There are many sites where you can find the description of these methods. And I also advise you to visit the site of the Right Question Institute. It is NGO, which is specialized on teaching adults and children and youth. They have programs for all of these categories to formulate and ask inquiry questions, beautiful questions, effective questions, helping in learning and everyday life situations. And I ask you to do it independently, rely totally on self-directed approach. And I will share with you those 2 methods, which are not that much described in the internet, but which I find effective and use in my own practice. All of these methods are based on questions. Actually, even those which I ask you to find independently, they are also based on questions. Questions is a core element of many methods which you can use on the stage of implementation of self-directed learning. And there is a famous quotation made by Einstein, which I really much like, and I consider that can be linked to a main purpose of the self-directed learning methods. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 45 minutes determining the proper question to ask. Once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. So many methods have questions as a core element because questions trigger divergent thinking, because questions not only make the mind open, but they are also able to guide and focus the thinking process. And they provide opportunity to think and act in the face of uncertainty, which is also very important. So the first method I want to share with you, this method is called three-component innovation questioning. It is a simple and method, and it consists from three groups of questions following one another. Why, what if, and how. Seems quite easy, yeah? And to show you the effectiveness of this method, I want to tell you a story. This story starts in the late 1970s when Van Phillips was 21 years old, carefree college student, natural athlete, and avid thrill seeker. He was water skiing one day with his friends when his motorboat hit him and its propeller severed his left leg, just below the knee. After recuperating in the hospital, Phillips was given a prosthetic foot made of wood and foam rubber. At the time, it was the best thing that the industry could offer him. But Phillips found that this replacement limb to be clumsy, uncomfortable, and limiting. This led Phillips to ask questions which would change his life and eventually the lives of many other people who found themselves in the same situation as him. So he asked himself, why can't a prosthetic leg perform more like a human one? Why can't it bend and flex, enabling a person to run and jump? His seemingly very naive questions were challenging to the experience of those who knew much more than he on the subject. Doctors, the prosthetic engineers, and others who understood what was possible and what was impossible in the industry in that time. And for them, Van Phillips was just a person who refuses to accept the reality and who refuses to accept simple facts about his state of health. But still, he persisted in asking his why and why not questions. So it took him about 20 years of inquiring questions, and he asked the same sequence that I presented to you in the beginning. Questions from the group why, questions from the group what if, and questions from the group how. So he was trying to challenge the situation and to find the way out. Finally, at the end of all this process, he made the breakthrough in the whole industry. But now I would like you just to show some questions that he asked himself during this quite difficult period of trying to find the solution. So from the group of why questions on the material used, why the tree when there are so many bad alternatives? On the form, why a leg prosthesis must be as massive as a human foot? On the main purpose of replacing and of the amputated part, why so much importance is given to the external similarity with a human foot? Isn't the functionality more important? When he found the answers to these questions, he started to generate ideas. What if he tries to do something different than the whole industry in the country? What if I can somehow reproduce the driving force of the springboard in the prosthesis? What if a human foot was more like a leg of a cheetah? What if we abandon the traditional L-shaped connection of the leg with the foot and create a prosthesis in the form of a smooth, continuous curve of the lower leg to the toes? When he found the answers on the stage of what if, and he generated many ideas, the stage of how question came. So how to implement ideas, how to choose the ideas to pilot them, how to decide which ideas are most suitable to me, how to start testing this idea to see what works and what does not. If it does not work, how can I find the error and correct it? These questions were uncovered for journalists, which made numerous interviews with Van Phillips after he became famous. But the most important thing that answering these questions, he managed to create 100 prototypes of the flax food. And finally, he created his famous cheetah prosthesis, which became the revolutionary finding in the industry of artificial foods. And what is very important, Van Phillips could jump on it, and not only jump, but also run, which was absolutely impossible before, which meant that a person with an artificial leg would run, jump, and compete on an Olympic level. So I found this story a wonderful example of what self-directed learning can lead to, guided by a simple sequence of 3 groups of inquiry questions. You can do the same with adult learners, giving them a frame of 3 groups of questions. Inside each group, they can formulate questions relevant to their goal and their topic. And usually, this method leads to wonderful surprises. The second method I can share with you is called question storming. So we all know what is brainstorming, but I do not like brainstorming very much, because in this method, somebody always owns the answer. There is the owner of the answer, owner of the idea. And when you make the brainstorming in a group of people with different experience or with different positions, it is sometimes difficult, because people look at the ideas of those who are higher in the position or more experienced and accept ideas as a better ideas. In question storming, it's not possible. Questions do not belong to anyone. Nobody owns a question. So question storming is a better method for adult audience because it really stimulates for cooperation. This method has 3 stages. On the first stage, you should set a topic. You can do it yourself as an educator, or you can use the group of learners and they can help you to set a topic. But the most important thing about the topic is that it is formulated as a statement. And the statement should be somehow controversial. For example, our values are outdated. Controversial? Yeah. Education will move totally online in the nearest future. Controversial? Yes. So the most important thing, the statement should fit to the field and the subject which you teach. So now I just give you general ideas, but when you formulate, it should really fit to the subject. The second stage is generating questions. With a topic statement to guide the session, participants should take about 20 or 30 minutes of their own time to generate as many questions as they can that relate to the topic statement. Educators should just keep the time and encourage participants to generate questions freely. It is critical that all questions are documented in a way that allows them to be filtered and organized later. Post-it notes, small pieces of paper, or digital collaboration tools are the excellent examples of what you can do. So they generate their questions individually, and it is better that they generate not less than 10-20 questions. When 10 to 10 questions from each person is ready, the third stage comes. It is refine and share stage. when the time runs out, and each participant should add their question to a central location, like a large wall, for example. It's important to gather them in a central place where group members can visualize themselves and make connection between many questions. And it's best to allow about 5 and 10 minutes of quiet time for participants to look all over the questions just before doing something with them, just to stick them on the wall or to stick them on some large surface, and to give them about 5-10 time just to read and to reflect on these questions. And at this point, the educator should begin to group questions into buckets, or to cluster them together with the group. So of course, you will not work with a huge majority of questions. You have to cluster them to be able to work further. So some clusters can reflect the most challenging questions. Some can gather questions that bring some clarity. The third can be question that brings some understanding. So you create categories based on the question that are presented. The most important thing is somehow to organize all these questions into groups. And when it's done, at the last stage, a group chooses questions they need to answer to find a solution to a problem, or to research a topic which was stated in the beginning, or to find the right answer to the problem that was inside of this statement which you offered them in the beginning. So from generating questions individually to putting them all together in one space and clusterizing those questions, the group comes to picking out the most beautiful and most effective questions, answering which they can solve a problem, they can research a topic, or find the answer to the main question. This method can be combined, and I can tell you how I do it in my own practice. I can give you an example. So I combine these methods on training courses for educators who want to learn how to design good educational programs. So when we already learn the main topics like methods of education, goal, how to choose the content, how to evaluate the program, here at the last stage, when they have to produce a draft of their educational program, I ask them to create a draft challenging their usual vision of how educational programs should look like. So I don't want them to produce something very typical. I want them to be creative, and I want them to rely on self-directed learning approach in creation of an effective, interesting, creative educational program. So I give them several questions, and I ask them, please start to generate, start to create the template for your educational program only after you find the answer to the following questions. So what kind of questions I give my learners? Why do we design educational program by one model? Why is my program not as good as I want it to be? Why can't my program find a way to participants? What if we change the usual model of the program to the opposite? How to connect the new framework with the content, methods, and quality conditions? Challenging. So I want them to find the answers, and only after that, make a draft of the educational program. When they have their draft, and the draft is usually very short, I gather them in the offline working meeting. And on this working meeting, I divide the whole group into small groups, and the whole day they will work in these small groups. So I use the question storming method to improve, to help them to improve the draft that they already have. And I serve just as a facilitator. What do I do? So I divide the group into subgroups, and I divide the program into components like target audience, educational goal, the content, methods, teaching strategy, evaluation, etc. Every component has its own table in the room. Program drafts each participant brought together with them to this workshop or to this meeting act like those statements. To work with every component, group has 45 minutes. When we start, group starts from any component. For example, the group number 1 starts with the component educational goal. During 45 minutes, they examine the drafts of each person in their subgroup and formulate beautiful, interesting inquiry question to the component educational goal. So they read educational goal that each one of them in a subgroup created and write creative questions about this component for each other. When the 45 minutes finish, they change their tables clockwise and they move somewhere. For example, the next table will be methods of education. So which means again, that during this 45 minutes, they read what kind of methods each one of them in the subgroup proposes for this program. And they create beautiful, effective, and inquiry questions which can help the author of this program to improve this component. At the end of the day, every person, every learner has a set of creative questions to the program design proposal. Now, job of participants is to work independently again, sort out questions, find the most innovative, and try to answer them, making the program better and better. And when they have the answers to these questions, I gather them again on the next meeting, and then they can share ideas, what they improved, how these questions help them to improve their program, why they changed something, and why they consider that now their programs are better and more innovative. So usually people who come to my courses are from different professional areas. Some are teachers of foreign language, some are conflict managers or mediators, some ecology, some are from the ecology sphere, or art, crafts, and so on. So I'm not an expert in all those fields. I can't teach them how to create a good component in their field, but what I can do is I can create a framework for self-directed learning and help them to find out on their own how to improve their program, or how to create the most innovative program using a group as a resource. So the common feature of all the methods for self-directed learning is a framework with which individually or in collaboration, learners can reach their own goal. And I advise you to read 2 books, A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger and Thinker Toys by Michael Michalko. They both are sources of limitless insights on how you can organize a stage of implementation of a self-directed learning when working with adults. Now we approached to the 3rd stage of self-directed learning, and this stage is dedicated to reflection and self-evaluation. And on this stage, educator helps learners to engage into the evaluating process and to track their progress to the learning goals. And one of the most widespread category of methods which you can use on this stage is the category of reflective diaries. I don't know what kind of kid were you. If you were one of those who had a secret diary in childhood. I had. Every day I wrote in the diary what happened to my dolls today, what new video I watched, what happened when we met with friends outside of the school or outside of house. And I stopped to write this diary only when I was in the middle school. And I opened this as a tool for myself only when I became an educator. And I also learned that the reflective educational diary, which we use in education, originates not from education, but from psychotherapy. Imagine that in psychotherapy, it was created and used as a very effective method for people who struggle with depression. It considers to be very effective because when people write down their thoughts, even if these thoughts are negative, and they reflect on their thoughts, and they have a kind of a dialogue with themselves on paper, it helps them to overcome difficult states of mind. Slightly from psychotherapy, this method moved to education. Of course, it is simplified here, but still it's a very, very helpful reflective tool, which help people to work with their own ideas, to have a kind of a dialogue with their mind, to overcome difficulties in education, especially if the topic or the theme that they faced with seems to them problematic, or if the learning process seems for them difficult. So learning diaries, they really help learners not only to reflect and have new ideas, see new ideas, come up with new ideas, but it also really much helps to track their progress and to evaluate it. So I will share with you several examples of reflective diaries in this video, and we even will try one on practice so you will understand how do you feel with this tool. Are you okay with this method? Is it valuable for you? The first one is called a simple reflective diary. Why is it simple? Because it offers learners only 4 simple questions. So you will offer for your learners to have a separate notebook for this diary and to write there every day or every 5 days or even once per week answers to 4 questions. First, what kind of learning goal they had for this period? It is good if your learners will write down their learning goals for every week, but not all adult students really do it. Most of the adult students think that they can memorize everything that they want to learn, so they don't need to write their learning goals down. But of course, adults are quite busy people, and time after time they forgot what I wanted to learn this week, what was my little goal for this particular day. So the first question is, what was your learning goal for this learning period? So you are trying, with this question, you are trying to get your learner back to the present moment, to his present learning goal. Then you ask your student to, your learner to reflect on the sources of knowledge he used during this week or several days, the process of learning has chosen, and the successful points of learning. It is possible to keep this diary confidential or make it public. In the second variant, learners write it as a live journal and reading journals of others from the course, or it can be like reading diaries from those people who are your group members in the course, or you can make this, you can offer to learners make these diaries publicly in general. And it helps other people by reading the insights of the group members to come up with new insights for themselves. And what it also helps, it helps to motivate your learners to keep learning. Because when they write and they know that somebody will read their thoughts and ideas, they keep more responsibility for their learning process. When they see that someone comments, and even if it's a question about their ideas, thoughts, or someone may not be agree, but somebody comments. That means for the learner that his ideas are interesting, that his ideas are valuable for the others. And this public journal in this case will increase motivation for learning. Another example of the learning diary is called learning log. This method offers learners to keep a record of all independent study they do using the log sheet. Each day, they should explain what they did and evaluate their activity. Learning log is something similar to my diary from a childhood, which I described to you earlier. You write every day, but here not about everything, but about your learning. It helps to track everyday progress, and it also increases motivation. The third example of a learning diary is my favorite one. It's called a springboard. In springboard, you will offer your learners a starting point of reflection. And springboard is a method which can be used for everyday reflection. When adults have tasks to reflect on their learning, sometimes they have difficulties with the starting point. Start to reflect about what? How to start to reflect in general? What should be my first thought, first trigger thought of the reflection, for the reflection? So in a springboard method, you give them all these starting points and make a creative process interesting and adventurous in advance. The starting point can be a statement, for example, a quote from a movie or from a book, or just a quotation from a very famous educator or a scientist. Or it can be a question, or it can be an unfinished sentence. By the general rule, if you give your learners a starting reflecting point in a form of a statement, they will reflect mostly on facts. And because statement produces thoughts. But if you give your starting point a springboard in the form of a question, then most probably learners will produce thoughts about emotions, not just ideas, but emotional reflection of what happened, what do they feel about some particular educational concept or experiment or whatever they are reflecting on. So based on these starting points, which you can give them every day, for example, today you give them a quote and ask them to reflect on this quote, or next day you will give them a question. So based on them, a learner should write 1 page of reflection every day. This method is used as an independent one, so you can recommend starting a whole new notebook for it, where each day of the course, your learners will have its own reflective springboard. Example of statements I use in adult education course you see now on the slide. And I want you to pause this video for about 3 minutes and try to write as much as you can as some reflection based on the first question from the list. What 3 things you want to implement in your programs for adults, but still scared to? Did you find this springboard question and your reflection valuable? Imagine how the level of your professional reflection can improve if you use it every day during at least 1 month. You can give learners 1 statement, or you can give unfinished sentence or questions for diary reflection after each segment of your educational course or at the end of every day of the workshop which you lead. Or if your course is really large and it lasts about the semester, then you can give the starting points for reflection every week. But as you know, in self-directed learning, our learners read a lot and watch a lot. So they can watch interviews with experts, they can watch educational movies, they can read a lot of articles and books, and there is a group of reflective diary methods that are dedicated especially to working with text or to working with movies. And here are 2 examples. The first one is called Double Diary. Ask learners to use a separate notebook for this diary, or they can make an electronic version. And ask them to divide a sheet of paper into 2 columns. In the left column, it is supposed to outline those parts of the text or a movie which attracted their special attention. In the right column, they need to write comments on the quotes marked in the left column. And the comments will be about why have this quote caught attention, or why this segment of the lecture, this video, or of the text attracted your attention. And what does it make you think about? What are your ideas? What are your reflections? Even now, when you are watching this lecture, you also can do this kind of job and make this kind of reflecting diary. If you take 1 sheet of paper, divide it into 2 columns, and in the left one, you will write what ideas from everything that I tell now attract your attention, what is interesting for you. And you can write down some quotations for this video lecture. And in the right column, you can write everything, all the thoughts and insight and all the reflection. And believe me that watching video lectures with the help of this double diary will be much more effective than just listening, just watching a lecture and listening to the expert. Working with diary is always more effective. Another example is a diary with reaction. It is the name of the method, and this type of reflective diary involves completing tasks for the text proposed by the educator. For example, you give links to some additional articles. So to every article, you can give a separate task for a diary with reaction. And examples of these tasks can be: choose 3 ideas in the text which you disagree with, and write, why do you disagree with them? Find 1 hidden message in the text. Note this message and reflect on this message. Or read the title and the first paragraph, write down 2 ideas that you already know on this topic, at least 2 questions that you want to find answers to in this text. Write down the answers when you find them out, and record at least 3 ideas that you did not expect to meet. It is very good if this kind of diary also will be public, because if all the participants of your group work with similar text or with the same text and they work independently, then it will be very interesting for them to read the ideas of each other and hidden messages, for example. If group members are working on different topics within one theme, choosing their own learning process, it is again very useful to leave this diary publicly so that all the group members could read it as you do it in LiveJournal. So almost in every diary method, I give you a recommendation to make it a public thing, because it really increases motivation of adult students and increases their progress. And finally, when you approach to the end of the course, you can come back to learning contracts you signed with your students and to the personal learning plans. What is recommended is to organize a group discussion and a group evaluation of plans and contracts. Are they complete? Why yes and why not? Are students really happy with the learning path they have chosen? Why yes and why not? And what are their results at the moment? Or you can ask your learners to write a reflective essay where they will evaluate how they learned and what they have learned. And reflective essays always have an introduction where the speaker of this essay or your learner shares what the overall focus of the reflection will be. The body of the reflective essay explains how the learner has changed and what he has learned. It also explains what things caused this change. And in this part, you can advise your learners to give a lot of specific examples. And in the conclusion, the learner sums up how he or she changed. And even more, it is better if the learner emphasizes the difference between him in the beginning of the learning process in the past, him now after the learning process, and who he can become in the future when he stops the course, go back to work, or go back to his ordinary life. What will be how this learning process and this learning outcomes will change him as a personality and as a professional. And what is important is don't forget that the process of the self-directed learning, in the process of the self-directed learning, educator plays the role of the facilitator, which means that you assist and you create appropriate environment for learning and for self-evaluation. But people who are responsible for the learning process and for its outcomes, first of all, are learners. And for them, it is sometimes important to remind that in the case of reflective diaries, you need self-control. You guys need some self-pressure even sometimes, because you need to structure your learning process. And such methods as reflective diaries and all the evaluative methods which help in self-directing learning, they show how important they are only after a month of trials. So these methods will not show you tomorrow your outcomes or their effectiveness. You need to practice them. You need to practice them weeks and months. And after that, you will see your progress. You will see how much you changed. You changed because it was your learning path and it was your progress. And don't forget about that. because you in the self-directed learning, you as educator, you are facilitator, you create the environment, you help, but who is responsible for the learning path and for the outcome is a learner.